Hi everyone, I'm CaliKim. Welcome to my garden. What if I were to show you a way you could double your squash harvest with one simple trick? Come on, let me show you. Bush summer squash varieties like zucchini and scallop squash are absolutely delicious to grow in the warm summer months, but they can take up a ton of garden real estate. They're real space hogs, taking up 3 to 5 feet per plant. So it could take up an entire half of this raised bed. But the simple trick I'm going to show you today is growing your bush summer squash vertically. So you can grow it up a trellis, saving space instead of it flopping over your raised bed and taking up a ton of space. And by this way, you can fit more into smaller space and double your harvest. You might already know that you can grow vining varieties such as butternut squash and spaghetti squash up a trellis. It makes sense. They're vining varieties and they will naturally climb. But zucchini squash, it's a bushy variety, and how in the world do you grow it up a trellis? Well, what you do is you plant your plant like you normally would, and then at the time of planting, you want to install a trellis. Very important that you do it at the time of planting so you don't damage the roots as it grows. And then as the plant grows, and zucchini does grow quick, so you got to keep an eye on it, you feed the leaves up through the trellis, and once you start to develop flowers and fruit, you keep the bottom leaves trimmed. Really important to do that to manage the size. Now, zucchini plants don't need the bottom leaves below the first set of flowers and the first fruit. So what you can do is as it grows, you just trim those babies off. Now the branches for bush squash have hollow stems. So what I do is I follow the stem all the way close to the main vine. Cut it close to the main vine because the stem becomes solid at that point. You don't want to trim it a few inches from the main vine because then you can introduce pests and disease into your plant. And this has the benefit of managing the size so you can plant double the squash in the same space. The next benefit of growing bush squash vertically is a huge one, and that's air circulation. Now, if you've been gardening very long, you know that squash is very prone to powdery mildew, which I'm telling you is the bane of my garden. Whenever I see that white dusting of powder all over my plants, I immediately treat the powdery mildew or prune the leaves. But when you're growing vertically, when you're growing up, there's a lot more air circulation under the plant. Now, powdery mildew happens when the leaves get wet and stay wet. When you have better air circulation, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to have much drier leaves, which really reduces the risk of fungal disease. We have another beautiful Costa Romanesca zucchini in the ground here with a trellis on top of it. And what I also do at time of planting is install a nice sturdy stake. And again, important that you do all this at the time of planting because squash roots are very tender, they damage easily, and you don't want to damage them later by installing it later. So as you're pruning your bottom leaves as your squash plant grows, another little tip that I always do is when the stem is exposed, I tie it to this stake with some of my favorite stretchy tie tape to give it that additional support. That way it continues climbing upward up the stem, giving the stem support and the squash fruit themselves support. You might have had problems with your squash in the past, only growing male flowers, not female flowers, or not getting enough pollination and you have to hand pollinate. This way the flowers are exposed to the pollinators, which is going to double your harvest, and it gives the leaves more sun exposure so they can photosynthesize and produce more too. One thing I love about growing squash vertically is that it makes for much easier harvesting. Now, who hasn't missed a few days of harvesting your squash and you end up harvesting big, huge baseball bats? They grow so fast and it's very easy to miss them. And squash are very spiny plants. When you have to crawl underneath a big sprawling plant to try and find your harvest, you often miss them and you often get scratched up all over your arms. But by growing up, you can easily see the squash that are growing, pick them, and then bring them inside to enjoy a delicious dinner. Much better flavor, much better quality, much better harvest. One thing I particularly love about growing squash vertically is it makes it possible for me to grow squash here in a small space, my Smart Pots container deck, right outside our back door. We can just pop outside and harvest it for dinner. Now, the variety I have here in this 15-gallon Smart Pot is a scallop squash. Beautiful scalloped edges. It's from my squash seed collection. And when you're growing in a container, you do want at least a 10-gallon on up to a 20-gallon container. So the 15-gallon black Smart Pots is perfect. So I've got my squash planted here in the middle, got drip irrigation installed, and when you're using a vertical support for your squash, A regular old garden variety tomato cage is perfectly adequate. It's nice and sturdy, and it's just the perfect size. The squash will get to about this height and then be spilling over the edges, making it really easy for you to see and harvest your squash at the perfect size. In addition to growing your squash vertically will really double your harvest, it's important to get a big harvest out of your squash that you stick to a regular fertilizing schedule. They're heavy feeders. So I'm gonna give my scallop squash a nice little feeding with my favorite plant cocktail. Get off to a really good start and keep it producing throughout the growing season. And you want to go back and watch my recent tomato video here for my full season-long fertilizing schedule. Make sure you let me know how your squash grows this summer. I can't wait to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and liking this video. See you next time in the garden.